Now, it may not be, it probably isn't a problem to do with terrorism. This is classic, for want of a better phrase, classic ethnic cleansing. But I'll tell you what will happen, and that's to the question of the hour, which is, what do we do? What happens in Myanmar if nothing is done to stop this policy of ethnic cleansing? If this ethnic cleansing continues unabated, what will happen next? And I'll tell you what will happen next. With 400,000 refugees now in Bangladesh, with the state of Bangladesh having just promised that it's going to build a 2,000-acre camp, a 2,000-acre internment camp to house these 400,000 desperate fleeing civilians in an internment camp on the border with Bangladesh, what do you think is going to happen in that camp? Well, the only analogy I can draw to a previous example of a spectacular failure as the world stood by and did nothing for too long from recent history of the last few years has been Syria. Now, to draw this analogy, the Syria uprising against President Assad began as a firmly secular uprising for democratic rights and free speech. It began with youth in cities such as Homs and Hama, graffitiing, spray painting graffiti on the wall with slogans for freedom and democracy. That's how it began. I followed it from the very beginning. What it mutated into was a jihadist hellhole. That's what it mutated into. And what I fear is that in a self-fulfilling prophecy, if the United Nations doctrine of the need to protect, the responsibility to protect, R2P, it's a formal doctrine of the United Nations obliging the UN to intervene whenever ethnic cleansing appears to be happening. It was a doctrine that was put in place after the debacle of Rwanda to make sure, as the slogan goes, that it never happens again. Never again is the slogan of Holocaust Memorial Day. It's there to make sure a genocide never happens again. Of course it did in Bosnia, in Rwanda and in other places, and now clearly there's a policy of ethnic cleansing going on in Myanmar. If the United Nations responsibility to protect R2P doctrine isn't invoked and implemented, I can tell you what will happen to those 400,000 refugees who are in internment camps, a 2,000-acre internment camp on the border with Muslim majority Bangladesh. That, what appears to me to be a nationalist ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, will become eclipsed, just as it happened in Syria, by groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are merely waiting for the opportunity to capitalize for their own nefarious aims and to suck out any nationalist struggle and turn it into the hellhole that they turned Syria into. Now, the reason we should act, the UN, the international community should act, is not because groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS hold us hostage. But the reason we should act is because these are human beings and we have a responsibility to protect. But what we cannot avoid, unfortunately, because the world doesn't work according to our ideals, is that a failure to do something will result in a catastrophe that will have ramifications not just for Myanmar, but for Bangladesh, for India, for Pakistan, and I can tell you for the rest of the world. What happened in Syria didn't stay in Syria. It came to our shores here in Europe. And of course that had a knock-on effect even with the Brexit vote. And so I think that it's naive and irresponsible to pretend that this ethnic cleansing that's currently going on in Myanmar will stay within its borders.